Outlaws kidnap rancher's wife, only to realize she's the most feared gunslinger. Kidnapping the rancher's wife seemed like the easiest part of their plan. Devil's Mayhem was about to discover that under the Montana sky, some mistakes are paid for in blood, and some wives are ghosts in disguise. The Montana wind, a relentless, biting force, howled across the vast expanse of ranchland. The air crackled with a tension thicker than the exhaust fumes that clung to the leather jackets of the Devil's Mayhem Motorcycle Club. This wasn't just open country. It was their dominion, a lawless kingdom carved out with the roar of engines and the chilling glint of steel. Their brand of justice was swift and brutal, leaving a trail of broken dreams and hushed whispers across the state. Fear was the currency here, and Devil's Mayhem collected it with ruthless efficiency. The stakes weren't simply about land or cattle. They were about survival in a world where the only rules were the ones they made. Then came the fateful night they set their sights on Victoria Kingsley. To their eyes, she was an easy mark, a rancher's wife, weathered but seemingly fragile, a convenient pawn to pressure her husband into selling their strategically located property. This parcel, nestled along the winding Bitter Creek Road, was the final piece in their twisted ambition to seize control of the entire transportation artery, and with it, the clandestine flow of something dark and lucrative. Victoria intended to unravel that secret thread by bloody thread. The low, guttural rumble of approaching motorcycles vibrated through the sturdy foundations of the Kingsley Ranch house, growing steadily louder. This wasn't the casual drone of travelers passing by on the distant highway. This was deliberate, a predatory sound that tightened the knot in your stomach. The sound turned, a metallic growl, into their long, dusty driveway. Victoria moved to the window, her movements economical, betraying a lifetime of ingrained vigilance. She wasn't simply observing. She was calculating trajectories, identifying potential ambush points, mentally mapping escape routes. 3 bikes, their chromes snarling under the weak porch light, rolled to a stop. The lead rider, a behemoth of a man with a face like scarred leather, dismounted with the swaggering confidence of a predator assured of its kill. This was Romano, the club's enforcer, his reputation built on broken bones and shattered lives. Beside him stood a younger, wirier figure, his eyes darting nervously, his hand never straying far from the knife sheathed at his hip. A recruit, untested, still haunted by the ghost of his conscience. Romano produced a thick, sealed envelope, holding it out with a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Victoria stepped onto the porch, her expression an unreadable mask. Inside, beneath the calm exterior, a cold, focused fury burned. She took the envelope, her fingers brushing against his calloused hand. A barely perceptible tremor, a carefully crafted illusion of fear. Let them see weakness where there was only coiled strength. Her mind, however, was a razor-sharp instrument, dissecting every detail. The cheap whiskey stench clinging to Romano's breath, the way the recruit's boots scuffed nervously on the gravel, the almost military precision in the way the third biker scanned their surroundings. These weren't just common thugs. There was a discipline, a chilling efficiency that hinted at something far more organized, more sinister lurking beneath the surface. "Evening, ma'am." Romano's voice was a low, gravelly growl, laced with a hint of mockery. "We have a proposition for your husband." Victoria met his gaze, her eyes the color of a winter storm over the Rockies. "Robert isn't here right now." Romano's lips curled into a predatory smile. "He will be. We're patient men." He gestured with a thick thumb to his companions, who leaned against their bikes, radiating an aura of coiled menace. Actually, Victoria's voice remained level, a stark contrast to the palpable tension that crackled in the air. "Why don't you boys come inside? It's getting a bit chilly out here." The recruit shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her direct gaze. Romano just let out a harsh, guttural chuckle. "We're fine right here, sweetheart. We wouldn't want to impose. Suit yourselves." Victoria turned back towards the door, then paused, her hand resting on the worn wood. "But if you're planning on making yourselves comfortable, you might want to move those bikes." Robert gets real, particular about who blocks the driveway. It was a small, seemingly insignificant remark, but it was designed to sow a seed of unease, to subtly challenge their sense of control. 3 days they waited, a silent siege hanging over the Kingsley Ranch. Victoria moved through the familiar rhythms of ranch life, feeding the livestock, mending fences, her movements betraying no hint of the turmoil within. But her mind was a finely tuned instrument, constantly analyzing, assessing, calculating. She observed the club's movements, their predictable routines, the chinks in their armor. They weren't just fixated on the land. Fragments of overheard conversations, hushed and hurried, spoke of shipments, coded rendezvous points, and the ominous phrase, "Canyon Road is hot." The fragmented pieces of a far more dangerous and complex puzzle were beginning to coalesce. One scorching afternoon, a sleek black SUV with heavily tinted windows joined the usual motorcycle entourage. Two men emerged, their tailored suits a stark contrast to the rough leather and tattoos of the bikers. Their presence exuded an air of cold authority that even Romano seemed to acknowledge with a grudging respect. They spoke in low, urgent tones with Romano, their gestures encompassing the surrounding landscape, their words snatched by the wind, military grade, transfer window, plausible deniability. A cold dread coiled in Victoria's gut. This was escalating far beyond a simple land dispute. Later that day, a nondescript delivery truck, its markings deliberately obscured, rumbled up to the Devil's Mayhem's makeshift headquarters a few miles down the road, a dilapidated warehouse they called the Pit. Through the powerful lenses of her binoculars, Victoria observed the unloading of heavy crates, their contents hidden from view. The men handling the cargo were not the usual biker thugs. Their movements were too precise, their demeanor too disciplined. Mercenaries. Devil's Mayhem wasn't just a motorcycle club. It was a carefully constructed facade, a cog in a far larger, more sinister machine. That evening, as the Montana sky bled into a breathtaking canvas of fiery orange and deep violet, Robert returned from town, his weathered face etched with concern. "Dawson stopped by the diner," he said quietly, referring to the local sheriff, a man notorious for his selective blindness when it came to the activities of Devil's Mayhem. "Asking about our plans for the ranch." "Seemed nervous." Victoria nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, where the jagged peaks of the mountains met the fading light. The pieces were falling into place with a grim inevitability. Devil's Mayhem was tightening the noose, their desperation a palpable thing. They were operating under a deadline, and it was fast approaching. The intrusion came without warning, shattering the fragile peace of dawn. The roar of a dozen motorcycles ripped through the morning stillness, their aggressive approach an insult to the quiet solitude of the ranch. Romano, his face hardened by purpose, kicked open the front door, the splintering wood echoing like a gunshot. "Where's your husband?" he bellowed, his voice thick with menace, the veins in his neck bulging. "He's gone fishing," Victoria replied, her voice remarkably calm, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Won't be back for a few days." Romano's eyes narrowed, suspicion tightening his features. "Funny, that's not what our people saw." He barked an order, and his men swarmed through the house, their rough hands tearing through drawers, overturning furniture, their presence a violation of everything she held sacred. They didn't find Robert. He was precisely where he needed to be, a key player in a meticulously crafted plan years in the making. They dragged Victoria out of the house, her protests ignored, pushing her roughly onto the back of a bike, the worn leather seat digging into her. As they roared away, kicking up a cloud of dust that choked the morning air, she subtly adjusted a small, innocuous-looking device concealed in the heel of her boot. A silent alarm, a prearranged signal sent into the digital ether. Held captive in a squalid, windowless room at the Pit, Victoria felt no fear, only a cold, focused determination. She was an observer, a predator patiently studying its prey. The arrogance of her captors was their greatest weakness. They saw her as a helpless victim, a bargaining chip, a means to an end. They failed to recognize the storm brewing beneath the calm surface, the decades of honed skills and deadly experience that lay dormant, waiting to be unleashed. She meticulously noted the guard rotations, the poorly secured access points, the petty squabbles and simmering resentments between the club members. These were not the disciplined soldiers she had faced in the past. They were undisciplined thugs playing at being an army. One humid evening, while a guard, a young, perpetually nervous kid named Mikey, was watching her with a bored indifference, she initiated a conversation. "You know," she said, her voice soft but carrying, "my husband, he has connections. Friends in some very influential circles." Mikey scoffed, not meeting her eyes. "You right? Like who? The Rotary Club?" Victoria offered a small, enigmatic smile. "Let's just say they don't take kindly to people who inconvenience their associates." She allowed the implication to hang in the air, watching the flicker of uncertainty that crossed his youthful features, planting seeds of doubt. It was a tactic she had honed to an art form. Meanwhile, a carefully encrypted message, disguised as routine agricultural data, slipped through the digital network, landing on a secure server far removed from the Montana wilderness. The message was stark, urgent. "Bitter Creek, harvest imminent." Confirming target acquisition. Marshall Kane, a name spoken in hushed reverence and fear in the clandestine world of intelligence, received the alert. He knew the sender. He understood the chilling significance of the message. The ghost had been awakened. Days bled into nights. The monotony of captivity, a thin veil over the simmering tension. Victoria continued her subtle campaign of psychological warfare, exploiting the insecurities and rivalries within the club. She learned more about their network, a sprawling web of corruption stretching far beyond the borders of Montana, intricately woven with threads of weapons smuggling, human trafficking, and covert operations. The shipments they spoke of weren't just about land or illicit goods. They were about death on a global scale. Then came the night. She overheard Romano's voice, tight with a forced calm, on a secure phone line. "Drake is arriving tonight. Everything has to be in place. No mistaques punto." Marcus Drake. The name was like ice water down her spine. A ghost in the international arms trade, a dealer in shadows with connections to corrupt government officials and a diplomatic immunity that made him virtually untouchable. That was the catalyst, the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to unleash the storm. Under the shroud of a new moon, casting long, distorted shadows across the pit, Victoria made her move. Feigning a sudden, debilitating illness, she managed to convince Mikey, ever eager to avoid any real trouble, to fetch her some water. When he returned, his concern etched on his face. She was waiting, a shard of sharpened metal, painstakingly extracted from a loose ventilation grate, glinting ominously in her hand. The takedown was swift, silent, brutal. Inside the main warehouse, a chaotic energy pulsed. Romano and his inner circle were clustered around stacks of unmarked crates, their voices raised in heated argument, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the acrid stench of desperation. Suddenly, the warehouse lights flickered erratically, then died, plunging the vast space into near darkness. "What in the hell?" Romano's voice boomed through the darkness, laced with a raw, primal fear. Then, the first deafening explosion ripped through the night, the shockwave rattling the metal walls of the warehouse. Not inside, but outside. A precisely coordinated assault had begun. Federal agents, clad in black tactical gear, their faces grim and focused, breached the perimeter with explosive force, their advanced weaponry spitting flashes of lethal light. "We're under attack. Everyone, get down," a voice screamed above the din of gunfire. Victoria moved like a phantom in the ensuing pandemonium, her movements fluid and lethal. Years of covert training, buried deep but never forgotten, surged to the forefront. She disabled security cameras with pinpoint accuracy, severed communication lines with practiced ease, sowing further chaos and confusion amongst her captors. Escape was not her only objective. She was systematically dismantling their operation from within, turning their fortress into their tomb. She located Romano near the loading docks, frantically barking orders into a satellite phone, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and panic. Before he could react, before he even registered her presence, she was upon him, a wraith emerging from the shadows. "Remember me, Romano?" she hissed, her voice a low, menacing growl that cut through the chaos. He spun around, his eyes widening in disbelief and dawning horror. Outside, the warehouse transformed into a battleground. The sharp crack of gunfire, the concussive blasts of flashbang grenades, the shouted commands of federal agents. A symphony of destruction signaling the end of Devil's Mayhem's reign. Inside, Victoria fought with a cold, calculated fury, her movements honed by years of facing impossible odds. She used the environment to her advantage, turning forklifts into battering rams, weaponizing crates, exploiting every shadow and blind spot. The years of being underestimated, of being seen as nothing more than a rancher's wife, fueled her every precise, deadly action. She finally cornered Marcus Drake near a secured exit, the man's usually composed features contorted with fear, a heavy briefcase clutched tightly in his trembling hand. "Going somewhere, Drake?" she said, her voice dangerously calm, laced with a chilling satisfaction. He whirled around, his carefully constructed facade of arrogance crumbling, revealing the raw terror beneath. You were supposed to be insignificant." Victoria's laugh was a harsh, humorless sound. "That's what you all think. But shadows have teeth, Drake. And right now, they're biting." With a swift, brutal move, she disarmed him and relieved him of the briefcase. Inside, a treasure trove of incriminating documents detailing his illicit arms deals, his connections to corrupt officials, the blueprints of his global network of death. Federal agents, their assault precise and overwhelming, swarmed the warehouse, securing the perimeter, rounding up the remaining members of Devil's Mayhem, their brutal empire collapsing around them. As the echoes of gunfire subsided and the dust began to settle, Victoria stood amidst the wreckage, the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder heavy in the air. Marshal Kane approached her, his expression a mixture of weary relief and profound respect. "You always were a force to be reckoned with, Kingsley," he said, his voice low, acknowledging the legend that was whispered in the darkest corners of their world. Victoria simply nodded, her gaze sweeping over the scene of devastation. The sheer scale of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Corrupt government officials operating with impunity, rogue intelligence agencies playing their own deadly games, a vast network of illicit arms trafficking spanning continents, fueled by greed and a callous disregard for human life. The information she had unearthed, the evidence now secured, was enough to send shockwaves through the highest echelons of global power. Later, as the last of the subdued prisoners were being herded into transport vehicles, their faces etched with fear and disbelief, Victoria watched the first rays of dawn paint the Montana sky in hues of bruised purple and defiant gold. The immediate violence was over, but the ripples of her actions were just beginning to spread. She knew that a return to a quiet, unassuming civilian life was a fantasy. The shadows had a tenacious grip, and once you danced in their realm, they rarely let you go. But this time it was different. This time, she wasn't just reacting, surviving. She was actively pushing back, illuminating the darkness, exacting a long-overdue reckoning. The fall of the Devil's Mayhem Motorcycle Club was more than just the dismantling of a local gang. It was a brutal exposé, a violent ripping away of the carefully constructed facade that masked a far more insidious global threat. News of the raid, strategically leaked to select sources, sent tremors of fear and paranoia through the international criminal underworld and the gilded halls of government alike. Federal agencies across the globe initiated internal investigations, their motives a tangled mix of genuine concern and self-preservation, all spurred by the legend of the ghost of Bitter Creek. Victoria walked away from the smoldering ruins of the pit, not back towards the quiet solitude of the ranch, but towards an uncertain future, one where the lines between hunter and hunted were forever blurred. The scars of her past remained, etched deep into her soul, but they no longer defined her. They fueled her relentless pursuit of justice. Strength, she knew, wasn't about brute force. It was about resilience, about the unwavering commitment to truth, even when the cost was immeasurable. Corruption might thrive in the deepest shadows, but even the most impenetrable darkness could be shattered by the blinding light of exposure. And sometimes, redemption wasn't found in escaping the past, but in confronting its demons head-on, ensuring they could no longer haunt the innocent. The message, delivered in fire and blood, echoed across the globe. Even the most formidable empires, built on fear, corruption, and violence, could be brought to their knees when faced with calculated resistance and an unyielding will. One individual, armed with knowledge, skill, and an unwavering moral compass, could ignite a revolution. The Devil's Mayhem, in their arrogance and their blindness, had learned that lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. They thought they were kidnapping a rancher's wife. They were catastrophically, fatally wrong. They had awakened a ghost, and the shadows were finally striking back.